welcome back to my channel. It's Jenny. I'm here today to talk to you about 3 great books, and they are companion books to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I decided to read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley because the historical book club that meets at the museum that I work at, we're reading it this month, and I really have always wanted to read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. My overall experience of reading the book itself was not the most positive. I enjoyed reading it. I wouldn't say that I hated the book, but I think it was a challenge for me. There were several reasons I found it challenging, one of which is because it is formatted in a way that I wasn't expecting, so a story within a story within a story, and I found that to be quite convoluted at times, and I found the lack of the narrative kind of having dialogue and the perspective changing to be a bit tedious. I also found Victor Frankenstein to be an unlikable character. I don't think he was supposed to be a likable character, and I don't mind unlikable characters in books. I can usually get along with them just fine, but in this case he irritated me immensely, to the point where I couldn't really have any empathy for him or any patience with him, which I think he definitely needed a lot of patience as a character. I had a lot of empathy for the monster, and his narrative was the one that I enjoyed the most. I wish that the story would have had maybe a few more empowered female characters, and I wish that I would have felt more of a connection to the novel overall. But what did give me a great connection with the story was Romantic Outlaws by Shelley. This is the dual biography of Mary Shelley and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. And because I was reading Romantic Outlaws, I was able to really dive deep into the themes of Frankenstein, and it was able to help me understand Mary Shelley as a person, the men in Mary Shelley's life, the experiences that she had had in her life up until then, up until being 18, 19, that led to a lot of the themes in Frankenstein, and it definitely enhanced my experience of reading the book. I got the idea to read them as companions from Jennifer of Insert Literary Pun Here. She had a TBR Classics and Contemporaries, actually I believe it was a tag video, and I really resonated with that idea, and I do think from now on when I'm reading a classic I will try to pair it with some sort of contemporary biography or another contemporary book that relates to that other book somehow, just to give me a bit more context and put it into perspective. Reading classics for me is not necessarily about having an enjoyable or entertaining reading experience. It's more about understanding where the evolution of the language comes from, where the evolution of Western literature has come from, and it gives me an easier way of accepting where the book falls in history. And so whether or not I enjoy it and think it's a great 5-star read is not as important to me. I'm really glad that I read Frankenstein, and I loved Romantic Outlaws. I found Mary Wollstonecraft's life extremely fascinating. Both Marys were extremely ahead of their time women pushing boundaries, women pushing what was even halfway considered acceptable for them in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So I really felt that that book was a very well written biography. It has a very conversational style, very novelesque in a lot of ways, but it gets those facts in there. I think Shelley also put a lot of her own interpretations onto Frankenstein and relating Mary Shelley's work to her life. And so obviously we can't know for sure if her interpretations are correct, but it did definitely give me a sense that I could relate the text and connect things. And so overall it enhanced the experience enough that I think, regardless of whether or not they are correct and exactly what Mary Shelley meant, they are good enough theories that they give you a great insight into the novels that Mary Shelley wrote. The third book I wanted to mention today is Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. Poor Things is a modern Frankenstein retelling, and Alasdair Gray takes a lot of the themes in Frankenstein and reverses and shifts them, and I found that to be really interesting. I actually read Poor Things before I read Frankenstein, and if I can give you a recommendation, I would say maybe you should read it after. I do think, having read Frankenstein now, I understand a lot more of Poor Things. I understand why the themes are more feminist, why the themes are more wry and humor, and the different tropes and things that Alasdair Gray was trying to poke fun at. It is also a story within a story within a story, but there's 3 distinct voices in the book, and that makes it a lot easier to digest than Frankenstein was, in my opinion. I was also able to appreciate all 3 of the main narrators of Poor Things more than I was of Frankenstein. And obviously Alasdair Gray was a modern writer, and so he was able to utilize all those modern developments in order to create a more enjoyable reading experience. And that's just something that Mary Shelley was not going for and didn't have access to when she was writing Frankenstein. So I really recommend you read these 3 books. I think that Romantic Outlaws and Frankenstein go very well together, and then you could have a little break or follow it up with Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. If you want to experience a lot of the scientific questions, moral questions, and gender role questions that Frankenstein kind of touches on, probably less so of the gender role questions, but they are subtly in there. If you want to explore all those themes a bit more deeply and with a bit more humor and a bit more of a modern theme set in the Victorian era, I would recommend checking out Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. And thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon with another video.